Never have I been so invested in a book that I need to stop and what I'm doing and do research on the author who wrote it. Until I read Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis. Hi, my name is Graham, and this is my YouTube channel, where every single week I read a book and then leave a review for you guys to be able to have a discussion with me. So go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button so we can continue on for the rest of the year, which is going to be awesome. But as I said at the top, I read this book this week, Lunar Park by Bret Easton Ellis. Can't say that enough.
That man in the corner, who is he?
Who is Bret Easton Ellis? I had to stop in the middle of this because I felt I should know who this author is. And indeed, I kind of do. I think we all do. We all know of a book and a movie called American Psycho. And Bret Easton Ellis, he is the author of that. How come I didn't know that until I picked up this book? I don't know. But this, Lunar Park, is something else incredibly. This is a mock memoir about Bret Easton Ellis's life. A mock memoir. What does that mean? A mock memoir means that it has a lot of truth in it. It talks a lot about his life, but then something crazy happens. So this book was wild to me because it started off where the main character was Bret himself, and he's going through his actual life of writing American Psycho, of writing his other books that escape me right now because I haven't read them. Writing Less Than Zero, The Rules of Attraction, The Informer, Glamorama. It talks about all those things of him being a successful author in New York City and his college life and his drug addiction. It went through all of it, where I had to stop and be like, wait a second, is this true? Did he get married to a random woman who had his child? And it blurred lines of what was truth and what was fiction. So here I am, finally understanding who Bret Easton Ellis is. He is an established author. He wrote some amazing stuff. And no, he did not get married to a woman by the name of Jane Dennis. That's just in this book. And so in the first chapter of Lunar Park, you go through this memoir-like state, and then this book goes interesting. And we kind of find out more about Bret Easton Ellis than I think he really meant to give us, but we also get a really, really cool story. So I know that maybe my clickbait could be, a little clickbaity, like who is Bret Easton Ellis? I'm not going to tell you. I told you already who he is. He's an established author. He wrote a book last year called The Shards. I haven't read any of them. This is my first introduction to him. And so let's talk about the premise of this book, and if this is a book I think you should read. Because from my perspective, if you're already a Bret Easton Ellis fan, awesome. This is my first book by him. I went straight to Lunar Park, which when I was reading it, I was like, man, should I be reading American Psycho first or understanding his other works to be able to understand this one? Because it's wrapped all together. It kind of weaves together in this book because the main character is Bret himself. And so let's talk about what exactly this book is. Pretty much, the story follows Bret Easton Ellis. He eventually gets married or rekindles with a model named Jane Dennis. Jane and Bret used to date and Jane ended up pregnant, having his child, even though Bret did not want that to happen. And so now he gets married, and he is the father of Robbie, who is his biological son, and she had another child with someone else named Sarah, who now he's the father of as well. This book is about Bret, the author, not quite growing up, and it's his reflection of his upbringing with his father and him trying to connect with his son. I think that's the main central point of what this book is. But there's something else that happens. Instead of just being a mock autobiography of who he is, it also begins to dip a toe into the paranormal and psychological horror of things. And so as he's understanding his father and thinking about him, mysterious things start happening to him, where some of his writings come to life. Patrick Bateman, who is the main character of American Psycho, who Christian Bale played in the movie, if you haven't read that book like I have, he is appearing out of the corner of his eye and is beginning to haunt him. His past work is haunting him. And in this book, Bret says that his father was inspiration for American Psycho, and that it kind of feels like he didn't write the book, that the things that happened with his dad is what wrote this story to go out to the world. And so he got a lot of bad press for that story, and now it's coming back to haunt him in a very mysterious and dark way. And so as he is struggling trying to connect with his son, he also is struggling with seeing this happen. But as I mentioned before, he also has a drug addiction. And so he's suffering through that as well, pretending to be sober, lying to his family, going through drug problems, and having that heavy, heavy addiction, and saying, oh, I need to clean up so I can be with my son, and then not having that happen. Anything from alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, heroin, everything is in this book, and he's a very flawed narrator. He is somebody that you can't trust throughout the entirety of this book. And so I found myself, as I read Lunar Park, to be like, what is happening? Is this real? People in the story also suggested, hey man, are you drunk? Are you high? Because that didn't happen. There's a part where he sees Christian Bale or Patrick Bateman in his house, and he's like, there's an intruder in the house, and he like runs from the neighbor's house over there because he can see straight into the house and nothing is there, and everyone's like, well, you smoked some marijuana, so you must have been hallucinating. And then he gets a phone call from the Patrick Bateman character and has close encounters with him where you don't know if it's necessarily real, if he's being haunted. It's really, really interesting because you just aren't really sure what is real as what is not. And this book just played a lot with that space, and it was in a very good, creepy way. I remember sitting downstairs alone in my house, just finished doing, like, stacking the dinner plates in the sink. So I was reading for a good 30 minutes, and some of the dishes settled when I was, like, listening to a part that was a little, not listening, but reading a part that was a little creepy, involving someone inside their house, and it just slam! And I just about had a stroke, man. I was scared out of my mind. I had to put the book down. Everything was scary, and it just gave me the chills because of the timing of what that was. And so it just really haunts you. A lot of it is sad. A lot of it talks about addiction, talks about fatherhood, and I don't know if it's just me. I don't know if it's just because I am a new dad recently, that these stories are just hitting home of that connection, or the fear of not being connected to them, or the thoughts of being a terrible dad or someone who is not present. And that was a lot of theme that was going on in Lunar Park in an interesting way. I generally think that this book you can read without reading any other of Bret Easton Ellis's works, because I haven't read any of it, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. It makes me actually more excited to read his other stuff, and maybe that was the point. Maybe the whole trap I have fallen into, where he makes himself a main character of a story, and it makes me go back and now read American Psycho and Less Than Zero and all those other stories, because I'm now intrigued because of the monologue and kind of felt like behind the scenes thought process of what those books are. Even though I'm pretty sure that the thought process that was mentioned with this Bret is actually different than the real life Bret, which is really confusing, which is true. There's actually a part in this book where Bret is so disoriented that his personality kind of splits, where he is Bret, and then he also has another part of him called the writer, and the writer is talking to him, but that's his writer mindset. So you actually are getting two dialogues on the same page of the writer mentioning that this is going to happen, and then Bret being like, yeah, well, I'll just experience that. And so you have two things coming true, like the writer is actually writing out what his life is going to be like, but Bret is there as the character. And so you kind of get this weird, it's super cool, where things change because Bret really forces it to, but the writer wants it to be one direction. And it's really, really cool. And that happens close to the end. And it's great. So I really enjoy this story. It resonated a lot with me. And there's no spoilers. I haven't spoiled anything really for you. I just told you the basic part of the story. And it really, as I was reading more and preparing for this, I wanted to know, like, what was this book really meant to do? And I know it's always up to our interpretation of what it is, but there was a small few sentences I read that mentioned that this was about Bret dealing with the relationship with his father, and you can really tell with this because he has experienced a relationship with his father. And I think a major story arc of this is forgiveness for abuse or forgiveness, that we're all people and make mistakes, because he made his character very flawed and kind of not doing the best with his son as well. And so I thought that was really fascinating to be at the end of it. Now, is this a perfect book? No. Some of the horror is a little bit cheesy. I really like the psychological stuff, but some of the jump scares or creepy creatures are a little bit more... That's neat. It's more Goosebumps. It feels like you're reading a Goosebumps. Which, if you like that, then you'll like the creatures or the weird monsters that kind of come into play. But also at the end, the very end of the book, without giving any spoilers, there's just something that doesn't add together. Like, something feels like it doesn't close. Like, there's a pretty good closing. Like, a lot of things get set. You kind of know where it goes. And then there's just one word. One word that's needed to really grasp it. And if you've read Lunar Park, you'll probably know what I'm talking about, because there's this one word that just wasn't given to really hit something home. I feel would have made a huge impact near the end of the book. So yeah, just one word was really needed for that. So what is my review? What do I think of Lunar Park? Well, I thought it was great. That was a great story. I have read other reviews a little bit before this because I had to chew on it a little bit, and a lot of people did mention that this was Bret Easton Ellis trying to be Stephen King without necessarily being Stephen King, and that Stephen King does it better. I am not an expert in Stephen King. I haven't read many of his books. The last time I read one, I believe I was like a sophomore in high school, and I don't think it was even a good one because I went halfway and stopped. So I'm not a Stephen King expert, so I can't really tell you. So from my experience, this was pretty good and pretty psychological and pretty cool in my opinion. And so I give this book 4.5 out of 5 stars, even with a few of the, weird monsters or whatever. I thought the psychological aspect and the overall story of parenthood and forgiveness and all that really landed well in this book for me. And it's not for the faint of heart as well. Like, you have to be okay with reading about someone who is a jerk and not a good person, being drug addicted and being wanting to cheat on his wife. Essentially, you have to be okay with that type of stuff to read on it. But I think it just set the tone of what type of person he was to kind of give him the arc near the end, which was really cool. So I liked it, and I hope you can like it too. I highly recommend checking out Bret Easton Ellis's Lunar Park, and now we know who he is. He wrote American Psycho, that leads to a question that I have. I wrote it down because I'm smart. Who is an author you feel should be more recognizable in pop culture? Like I just talked about Bret Easton Ellis. We know American Psycho, but I don't think I ever knew someone wrote that book or what his name was. It wasn't like a household name like J.K. Rowling, for example, or Tolkien. We all know about Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, and that's kind of, and Stephen King obviously is a household name. So who's an author that you feel should be up at that level? Let me know in those comments, and let's have a discussion about it. Maybe it'll be a book that I read later on in the year. As always, thank you so much for watching my video. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe so you can see what I'll be reading through next week. Have a great day, and don't get too scared out there. Toodles.